So the example of the $1 billion value company created by one person, do you see that as something that's feasible?
I think so. I think that, I've seen a bunch of examples where small companies like Instagram comes to mind, that started really small, and by the time they got acquired, they were still very small. WhatsApp is a similar example. And so I think, that can exist. The question is a single person company, how they're also managing support and accounting and all the other things that are outside of creativity. And maybe a Copilot also helps them with that, answering support questions. But I think it's more fun if you have a smaller team of people available that handles
Less
those things.
lucrative. Yes.
Um,
So let me read you this example that I saw on Reddit of a coder that was talking a little bit about how they've worked with generative AI to build. So they say, it's mind-blowing how quick I can move now. They're using Sonnet 3.5, which is an Anthropic model. I'm pretty sure I could implement copies of the technical parts of the most popular apps in the App Store 10 times as fast as I could before large language models. I still need to make architectural and infrastructure decisions, but stuff like programming the functionality is literally 10 times faster right now. And this is the process that they use. The first thing they do is they think hard about the feature and probably discuss it with Claude. The second thing they do is write a basic spec for the feature. It's just a few sentences and bullet points, and also iterate with Claude on the spec. And then they are sure to provide Claude with all the relevant context and ask for the implementation, the code. So basically what they're doing here is brainstorming an app with Claude, speccing out an app with Claude, and then having Claude code it. I mean, that is remarkable. Is this something that we're going to see be more common?
I think we're going to see it at a smaller scale. For small projects, you can probably, get there even without a lot of computer science, computer engineering knowledge. For larger projects, I think the step missing is the architect, the software engineering expert that knows which database to pick, which cloud provider, how to make the app, scale from 10 users to 10 million users. And the model can kind of help you with that by giving you options, right? We have all seen that when you ask ChatGPT a question, an open-ended question, it gives you options and explains to you kind of like how to get there. But to navigate then this, tree of information, you still have to have, subject matter expertise. I don't think that goes away, but I think, if you have a well-defined task that you can describe, to a certain level, to model or to a whole system like Copilot, you will have that agent, if you want to call it like that, do the job for you to 90%, of what you expect. The flip side of that is if you think about when you work with other people, whether it's on software or on other projects, is like, how long can you have a person go by themselves when you give them a task until they're going so far off track of what you actually wanted to achieve versus what you described to them, right? Like more often than not, we need the feedback loop as humans. We can't work in isolation for too long until we're either completely off track or we come back, with a work result that isn't really what the person that or manager or or customer expected us to do, and I think this is where we have the boundaries of these models. If the human can do that, because ultimately the customer can't describe it, or the manager can't describe it to the level of degree that you can actually fulfill all the requirements, then a model can do that by themselves as well. That's why we believe the human needs to be in the center. The human needs to be involved at the step of the way to make sure that we're not getting into the wrong direction.
But this is exactly what the person is describing, that they're not only asking Claude to write the code, but they're dialoguing with the AI bot about the different spec and the decisions and how to, set up the components and things like this. And then it builds only at the last step.
I called this, I don't know what it was, I called it the second brain. It's kind of like we have an extra, outside of our brain memory chip that gives us all the information that we can store ourselves. And even if, we have a lot of things that we learn, in university, in high school, and even before that we can't really store, and we often forget these things. And so the AI is helpful to retrieve this information again You just need to know how to ask the right question and then work with you. That's why we ultimately call it copilot. It helps you, to have fun with the things that you want to work on, and it takes over the boilerplate, as we call it in coding, the stuff that surrounds all the creative part of the process.
Right. Now with Gmail, so Gmail allows me to write emails within the Gmail application and will suggest some text for me as I write. Sometimes I accept it, sometimes I don't. But also, like, I could just go to Claude and ask Claude to write the email. So I'm thinking in your circumstances, like, is there a reason why people should be using like the Copilot within GitHub as opposed to like having this conversation with, let's say, an Anthropic bot and just having that write the code and then dumping it into the code editor?
By the way, you can also use the AI to summarize the email. So it's basically the one side writes the email with the AI and the other side summarizes the email with the AI, at which point you can ask the question, why not just send the prompt to the other person and save the time on all the friendliness and the salutation and whatnot that we put into emails, because it's
or just become proficient at writing concisely. But I think as a journalist, I know that part of the world is not going to is more difficult to proselytize than others. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think to some degree that will happen. And to some degree, we have so much information around us now that the summary is good enough. If you only want to read the headline and the summary and not dive into 10,000 word article, because it ultimately means you have more time for other things. We're all, dealing with limited attention, limited lifetime ultimately. And so if I can shortcut some of these things, that means I have more time for other things. Coming back to your question now, why not use the generic chatbot? The power of Copilot is that it lives, in the work environment of the developer. So yeah, you can copy and paste everything that you see in front of you into a generic chatbot and have it give you an answer. But it's much more powerful to have the chatbot sit within your environment, where it knows, what files are open. It knows what you wrote, before that. It can look at adjacent tabs. It can even look, in developer in the developer world at the output, the debug output is what we call that, and the console and error messages and those kind of things. And so it has much more context available that helps it to answer the question, within the specific context of the project you're working on. A very simple example is that it knows, whether you like your variable names with camel case or capitalized, and or whether you write in German or English by just looking at the context of your file.
Right. So one question for you. So basically you can write the prompt of what you want and the code will be developed on the back end, or will help you develop the code on the back end. Is there going to come a point where we're not going to need code at all to build? Because like, if you can just prompt, then why do we really need a B in the code?
You might say we're already at that point to some degree where, when you ask and go ChatGPT, go and ask ChatGPT a question, you get an answer, and when you ask a question to plot a chart, for example, or do a mathematical calculation, it actually generates a Python script that then, plots that data into a chart, and it shows you the chart. It still shows you that step where you see in between the Python script, but they could as well hide that, and you just see the chart output, right? Like in many ways, ChatGPT is giving you an answer without you ever having to worry how that was generated. And so, yes, we're going to see computer systems where large language models are just one building block in addition to code, or maybe it's multiple language models and image models and time series models and whatnot, plus code combined to generate all the output that the developer or the user expects.
Do we still need engineers then to code?
Yeah, because first of all, there's billions of lines of code out there that still have to be maintained. One of the examples I'd like to get is that most banks are still running COBOL code. That's a programming language from invented in the late 50s when Eisenhower was the president, right? That still
So this
runs
is
on
maintenance.
mainframes.
I'm talking about like to build new things. Like, is there going to come a time where we're just going to have prompters instead of coders?
Well, most developers work on an existing code basis, so I would push back a little bit on maintenance. We're building on top of an existing world. I think there's developers have always moved up the abstraction ladder. You know, we used to build it all ourselves, then it came the internet, and we used to start sharing software components, so-called open source. You know, nowadays most applications are sitting on a stack of 1,000 components already, and you're building the 10% layer on top of that. Now that 10% layer, you know, might, you know, at some point be written in 80% by AI or replaced by AI, but that means you have more time for the remaining 20%. On top of that, the pile is getting always bigger, and the developers are still going to have enough work, you know, carved out for them. In fact, I'd say, you know, AI has created more work for developers, because now somebody has to build all these AI systems, and we're not at all at a point where you can just, you know, have an AI engineer, quote unquote, do the job of a real human. And like, that doesn't exist. And even if it exists, it works well in a demo, but it doesn't actually do any real work.
Wait, so help me square the fact that AI has created more work for developers, yet developers are more efficient.
Well, you mentioned, you know, all the companies with an AI strategy. So all these companies that create an AI strategy, including ourselves, you know, now are not only building GitHub, we are also building Copilot. And so now we have, you know, 2 products to maintain. And Copilot as an AI system is still a lot of code that we're writing day in, day out, in addition to maintaining and extending the platform that GitHub is with over 100 million developers. And so if you look at, you know, all the companies building AI today, they carved that out either as a new team, as a new focus area, in addition to all the things that they were working on before. And, you know, there's thousands of new startups around the world that have made AI their investment goal, you know, the thing that differentiates themselves from the existing companies. And as such, you know, more work has been created for developers working on AI systems.
Okay, so you're in a very interesting spot because you're running GitHub, and GitHub is part of Microsoft. And GitHub with Copilot might be the perfect company to implement generative AI, because it's one of those things where, like, there's usually a right answer to the question. There's libraries and libraries of code stored on your platform effectively that makes it not easy, but more straightforward to train on. And when people are writing, the large language model can rely on that history to predict or to suggest what the next bit of code should be. So it's almost like the most perfectly suited discipline to use large language models for is code. And in fact, if you looked at the discussion of generative AI recently, there's been a lot of discussion of how it hasn't really proved its economic value outside of coding. Now that's the bear case, but anyway, I'm throwing it out there for point of discussion. The question that I have, and lots of people have, is this now something that what you're seeing in your field, where it improves the employee's effectiveness by 55%, makes them happier, allows them to do more and build more, is that generalizable to other fields? And if so, if you think that it's the case, then why? Because that's the bet that Microsoft is making, right? It's not just coding, it's everything.
You know, I think we have forgotten how many things AI already does for us, or, you know, we are not realizing it. You know, the image recognition in my car, detecting the street.
But we're talking about generative AI in particular. So we can go on for days about how AI has been, you know, for feed ranking and computer vision, fine. But the big moment right now is all about generative. And generative has been something that GitHub has written with Copilot to this amazing moment. But that's the question. Is that type of technology in particular transferable elsewhere?
I think one scenario that comes to mind that we are already using at GitHub is support. And so, you know, if you look at our support system today, you actually find the GitHub support copilot that tries to help you before you submit your ticket to a human. And we actually see, and it generates answers. So it's generative AI, uses the same large language models to stay within the scope of your question. And we see that the number of tickets that get solved that way is above 50%. So, 50% of those questions that go through the support copilot get solved by the support copilot and do not get submitted into to a human. And so as such, it makes, supporting our developers, our customers, more efficient for us as a company. So I'd say, that's definitely another scenario where we see the efficiency gains for us as a company. Similarly, we have an internal tool called Octobot, like OctoCat, our logo that I have here on my T-shirt, and it helps our folks internally to solve IT problems, and our IT team is getting more than 3 hours per IT supporter back through that internal tool, right? Just by helping employees to solve their own IT issues instead of having to talk to a human first. And it's all along the same ways, which along the same lines, which is like generating text that helps you to solve the task that you have a problem with, whether it's in support in IT or that's in coding, to focus on the things that you're really getting value out.
Right. Okay, I want to talk about what the next set of models might bring, but let's take a break before we do that. So we'll be back right after this to talk about the next set of models and a bunch of other stuff. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. And we're back here with GitHub CEO Thomas Domke. We're talking about everything that AI can do and sort of how the advances might help propel not just coding, but everything else forward. All right, so here's what I'm hearing about the next set of models that are coming, and I'm talking about like the GPT-5s and the Claude 4s and whatever it might be. But the one thing that I'm hearing is that they're going to be much, much better for coding. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on how much further there is to go for these models to be able to handle code, and what you think even, these models getting even better at coding might portend for, in terms of, it might portend for what you're seeing with the developer community today.
We believe, one of the things these newer models will be able to help with is we call agentic abilities, solving multi-step tasks. One classic example in software today, in small and big companies, is that you don't have to go for too long until you have tech debt. Until you have code that is old and needs to be maintained, that needs to be updated, that needs to be scanned for security vulnerabilities. And if you look into the backlogs of most engineers today, on the one side, they have all the innovation, all the cool stuff they want to work on. And on the other side, they have all the maintenance tasks. And one of them is burning down security vulnerabilities that have, stacked up over time. And so we think, the next generation of models will be helping with burning down these security vulnerabilities. In fact, we already have a feature in market that we call autofix that helps with known issues and burns those down. But it only works right now in a single file. And as you have more powerful models, you can do that across multiple files, basically solving the issue not just in one place, but in multiple places.
And how do you teach like a model to be able to do that? Like, obviously reasoning, agentic stuff has all been talked about as breaking stuff down to its component parts and then learning how to work on it one by one. I mean, it seems sort of antithetical to the way that LLMs work today. Not antithetical, but very different, which is that they just kind of like take a prompt and then just spit back a bunch of information.
You described it yourself earlier, which is like this multi-step is that in the first step, you get an answer from the model that, describes the solution. And then what you typically do when you reason with the model is you ask it, about more about the first step and then about the second step. And so you're drilling yourself down into this tree of different steps. And I think as we, move forward, agents will be able to do that to a certain degree themselves. And the tricky part is then to figure out when do I have to come back to the human and ask the question that where I need the pilot to make the decision and not have the co-pilot basically go down the wrong path.
Okay, this is sort of a controversial question in the AI world, but I'm going to ask it to you. Do you think we're going to get to the point where, we're talking right now about effectively AI taking the reins and starting to build and then coming back to the human? Do you think we're going to get to a point where AI is going to just improve itself?
It seems like a bit of a trick question. I'd say, obviously we have seen the AlphaGo and AlphaFold that already happening. The AI has improved itself, right, and has learned to play Go, and then got as good as the best Go players, and in fact got better. And what we also saw then afterwards is that the best Go players figured out how to still beat the model. And so even though there was like a period of time when everybody was kind of like depressed that now that the game is ruined, the best players figured out they can still beat AlphaGo. And so I think, there's definitely going to be problems that AI will be able to solve for us. As I mentioned, burning down security vulnerabilities as an example. And I think most folks will be very happy about that because then it gives them more time to work on stuff that they actually want to work on instead of doing the same security vulnerability fix over and over again in multiple files. Is the AI, going to get to the singularity? I don't know. And I think, if I know the answer and how to get there, I probably, build that company
You would
myself.
build it. Okay.
I'm joking a little bit, but like,
Right.
I think, we will see we'll see over the next few years, if AI can not only do what it is instructed by humans, but can actually get to a place where it can create itself in the sense of, not getting an instruction first, and can kind of like, produce ideas. Today, while it may appear that a Claude or ChatGPT is generating stuff, at the end of the day, it's just predicting the next word, right? The next word after that. It has no consciousness because it cannot say no to you. It can only predict an answer that says, I don't want to predict the answer. But, it still gives you an output. It can't be silent, if you will.
Right. And look, it wasn't a trick question. Like the question is not, can the model sort of learn to get better as it goes, right? Which is still following the model. Like the question is like the basic design of these AI programs. Can AI learn to make them even better? Like, can AI be able to take a GPT-4 and turn it into GPT-5, right? That's the real question. You think that's going to happen?
I think it's like predicting the future, and I
Right.
don't know if I could, if I can. I don't know. I haven't seen, I haven't seen any indication that that's possible today. But maybe I'm on your podcast again in 3 years, and you're telling me, see,
Then
Thomas,
the
you were
AI is
wrong.
interviewing you.
It has happened. Maybe the AI is going to do the podcast between the two of us. No, but like, look, if you look at the technology today, it's super powerful. It helps developers and support agents and IT employees to achieve their job faster, which ultimately means they have more time for other things in life. And I think that's remarkable. And I'm not too worried about AI taking over these jobs and replacing them with a fully automated employee.
Now, another thing that I find interesting is this sort of constraint on computing. And I was looking at your Twitter and I saw that you recently praised the fundraising of a company called Etched, which has built chips that are purpose-built for inference, which is effectively running these AI models, which are extremely expensive to run now, but it's much cheaper to run on an Etched chips. How important do you think hardware innovation is for these technologies to be able to be cost-effective and grow to the point that sort of the industry is betting on? And then on that note, what do you think about Etched?
It's incredibly exciting that we have silicon companies in Silicon Valley again. I think that's number one. There's innovation in silicon. And there's not only Edge, there's, a bunch of companies that are going in the same direction. And I think it's just fascinating to see after, we believe that Moore's law is over and there's no more innovation in chips. We are back, to a world where there's innovation across the whole stack. We talked a lot about models, we talked about Copilot, and we talked about agents, which is going up the stack. But there's also innovation going down the stack, from the model to the data center, all the way down to the chip. And I think we are going to see much more on that in the coming years. The cost to run inference will come down with these specialized chips. The models themselves become more efficient. GPT-4o Mini was announced last week, which is much faster and much more efficient. And I think we're we are going to have innovation on the top end, where bigger models come out and do more stuff, and we are going to have innovation on the efficiency side, where the functionality that a few years ago required more GPUs and more time is now done much faster. And I think it's incredibly important to have that, because the faster you get the response, the faster you're able to iterate. Whether you do that manually, while you're asking questions, or whether you're doing that automatically in a copilot where you need to do multiple steps to generate code, or in Copilot we're always generating 10 responses. You can actually see them in your editor if you open the side panel. So because we then want to pick the best one for the context you're working on, and you can cycle through those, right? So if you can get those 10 faster, you actually probably get the higher acceptance rate from the developer, because they saw the suggestion before they kept typing whatever they were typing.
Yeah, and you just mentioned that OpenAI has reduced the cost to use GPT-4o. I got a question. I asked, like, what should I ask you? And Alex Wilhelm from TechCrunch, he asked me, he's like, why is GitHub Copilot so cheap when the perceived value is so high? Why not add a zero? What do you think?
We were really happy about the price point. I think there's a balance with every price point and every new product to find between mass adoption and the value getting out of the product. $10 for individuals and $19 for employees in a company per month is a great price for all these productivity gains. It has allowed us to grow to 1.8 million paid seats, and we're really happy about the competitiveness of that price point.
Are we going to get to a point where most of the code that's being generated is generated by AI, and the developers are basically auditors of that code?
I believe so, yeah. I said actually 2 years ago at a conference that my prediction back then was 80% of code is going to be written by AI in 5 years. So I guess I have 3 years to go for that to become true. Last year, we already said that on average, 46% of code is written by Copilot in those files where it's enabled, and for some languages, over 60%. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a great thing, because it means developers have more time to write the thing that actually matters. The thing that is creative, that's the thing that's new, the thing that's differentiated, and they don't have to write all the boilerplate anymore.
Okay. And then, all right, last question for you. You said that you have 100 million users on GitHub today. You think that you're going to get to 1 billion with this. So I'm curious, like, why you think AI is going to drive so many people to start coding? And then what does that mean for a broader economy?
I believe that today the biggest adoption blocker is the complexity of the technology, the complexity of a language that is not the language that we learn and use every single day when we communicate. And programming languages are great because they're deterministic. The same thing has the same output every time you write it. But it's hard to learn. It's hard to learn when you're a kid. It's much harder to learn than playing an instrument or drawing an image, because you have to learn the thing first before you can produce anything. And then you still have to develop your craft and do it over and over again to actually get good at it. And I think AI is going to accelerate that massively. And 1 billion developers by 2030 or so is a little bit under 10% of the population, depending on where gross population is going. That's actually a low number if you think about it, because we all use computers every single day, yet we are not able to create the thing. Most people are not able to create the thing that runs on those computers. And I think, most people are able to go to Home Depot and buy a screwdriver and put a screw in a wall. And I think it's just going to be a fundamental skill of humans to be able to control the computer and create something on them. Whether then they use that and become a professional software developer that makes money by doing so, that's a very different question, in the same way that not everybody that has, some skills at home on home improvement is becoming a professional contractor, professional musician, a professional artist, right? Like those things are decoupled. And I think for our economy, it means that we have a much higher literacy in computer engineering and computer science and software ultimately. And that means we will go be able to solve more problems, because ultimately we strongly believe at GitHub that most human progress is going to be achieved with the help of software. And without that software, without software developer, we're not going to, climb the evolution ladder.
So people used to say, learn to code to people who lost their jobs first as a helpful suggestion and then as kind of an insult. And then they started to wonder maybe they shouldn't be learning to code because that's going to be taken over by AI. But your stance on this is no, we're still going to need the coders.
And we still have code. Look, the AI and the copilot is not going to replace the code. The code is just lower in the abstraction level, in the same way that your chip in your computer still has an instruction set. We used to do punch cards, and then we had assembly language. Now they go into very technical stuff, but the chip at the end of the day is still lots of little switches that switch between zeros and ones. That doesn't go away. It just moves into a layer where it doesn't bother us as much, and it doesn't keep us from building the things we want to build. And I think that's the true power of generative AI.
Very cool. Well, I think you should release this app. It's a flight tracker app that you worked on. I would definitely like to use it.
It looks horrible.
Come on.
It solves one purpose. I know every time, like through yesterday, I know whether I've been on that specific plane. Every plane has at the tail numbers, like a license plate. And so you can kind of track, I've been on this flight on that exact plane before. But it looks horrible. It's kind of like asking me to go on stage with Taylor Swift and sing a duet with her. I wouldn't do that either, even though I sing in the shower, right? And I think that kind of well describes like the intention here. Is like one thing is the freedom of being creative, and the other one is being so good that you can become a professional.
Right. Well, Tomas, look, you're right. The gates of nerditude have swung wide open, and I'm totally into it. Thanks so much for joining. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. It was super fun.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back on Friday breaking down the news with Ranjan Roy, and we'll see you next time on Big Technology Podcast.